Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 25. We are a quarter from 100 away. That's my measurement. Lore Lords. And today we're talking about something that I have absolutely no idea about, which honestly, 25 episodes in, probably one of my favorite types of things when you're like, hey, I'm going to talk about this. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. I like the freshness. It feels good. And I'm excited to get started. So, Atlas, hello.
I'm here. We're going to talk about something that you don't know about, which is, again, I'm on the same page. Like, I love bringing something to the table you have no idea what I'm talking about,
Right.
which is fantastic, especially this one. It's pretty famous, so there was a chance you knew about it. I don't think it's not like everyone knows about it, of course, but like it's a pretty well-known little mystery if you're into little mysteries and looking into weird things.
Right.
Tonight we're talking about the Voynich Manuscript, which you probably saw by the title.
Yes.
It's
I was going to try pronouncing it in the intro, but I was like, I'm going to screw that up.
Voynich.
Voynich.
Yes.
Voynich.
So, it's a bit of a trip. This isn't going to be a super long one, but I've wanted to talk about this one for a while because it's so weird, and it's a very famously weird object, I guess is the way to put it, that has been a mystery since the medieval ages.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And it still is.
Okay.
So let's just get into it.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Great.
yeah, since you don't know what it is, I figured which I had a feeling, something I wanted to start this episode with was actually a quote. It's a pretty long quote. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. This is the start of the quote. In 1912, I came across the most remarkable collection of preciously illuminated manuscripts. For many decades, these volumes had lain buried in the chests in which I found them in an ancient castle in southern Europe. While examining the manuscripts with a view to the acquisition of at least a part of the collection, my attention was especially drawn by one volume. It was such an ugly duckling compared to the other manuscripts, with their rich decorations in gold and colors, that my interest was aroused at once. I found that it was written entirely in cipher. Even a necessarily brief examination of the vellum upon which it was written, the calligraphy, the drawings, the pigments, suggested to me the date of its origin to be the latter parts of the 13th century. The drawing indicated it to be an encyclopedic work on natural philosophy. The fact that this was a 13th century manuscript in cipher convinced me that it must be a work of exceptional importance, and to my knowledge the existence of a manuscript of such an early date written entirely in cipher was unknown, so I included it among the manuscripts which I purchased from this collection. Two problems presented themselves. The text must be unraveled, and the history of the manuscript must be traced. It was not until some time after the manuscript came into my hands that I was able to read the document bearing the date 1665 or 1666, which was attached to the front cover. That document is a letter from a Johannes Marcus Marci to Athanasius Kircher, making a gift of the manuscript to him. This is of great significance. That is a quote from Wilfrid Voynich himself, in which the book is named after.
Fair. Wow. Okay. So for those who don't know what a cipher is, it's basically like code. It's
Yes.
like it's written in code.
Yes, and if you're watching live, there's a picture of Voynich right now. I'm going to be showing a lot of pictures throughout this episode on the stream. So if you're watching this, if you're listening to this in audio, just Google them because they're not hard to find. Which I'll bring up when I do. I'll bring up you should look at this now. Sure. I would say don't Google if you don't know what this book is. Don't even look for it right now because it is insane. Just let us get to it naturally, and it'll be better off in the end.
Great, I'm down. Let's go.
So that was a quote from Wilfrid Voynich, and now we're going to talk a little bit about him.
Great.
So he was born on the 12th of November 1865 in the city of Telsai, in the Russian Empire, and this city is now part of Lithuania.
Oh, I'm Lithuanian.
Yeah, I was going to say you've mentioned that before, so there you go. This guy could be your relative. His name was Mikhail Habdank Voynich, I believe is how you would say it.
Okay, sure.
Yep.
Great.
He would grow up under the typical strife of being a subject of the Russian Empire, and many people of this time period, like many people of this time period, he grew up to be a revolutionary.
Classic Lithuanians.
And while he was born in Lithuania, his family is actually Polish, So he was a Polish-born Russian
classic
Empire.
Poles.
Yeah.
I'm Polish too, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very mixed people in that area.
Yeah. Not kind of banging each other.
But so he was a Polish revolutionary, and that isn't the easiest life to be living in Tsarist Russia.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So he would keep in the down low, and he attended universities at Warsaw, St. Petersburg, and Moscow.
Oh, well,
so he was
around.
he's a very intelligent and very book-learned man, and he would end up graduating from the Moscow University with a degree in chemistry, and would move on to be a licensed pharmacist.
Okay.
So in 1885, at 20 years old, he would join Ludwig Warnicki's revolutionary organization, which you've probably heard of, the Proletariat. Now,
okay, yes.
Yeah, this wouldn't be a very long-lasting thing for him, because the next year it took a very big turn south in 1886. When he was attempting to free fellow conspirators from police holding, he was arrested and sent to penal servitude at Tunka, near Ikrust in Siberia. So this guy was...
Penis was something? What?
What was? Penal servitude. Penal servitude.
I made a bad joke. Go ahead. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, penis. Yeah, no. It means for those of you listening who don't know, it means prison.
It doesn't have
nothing to do with penises. So he was sent to Siberia, that's pretty standard, like gulag treatment, right? This is pre-Soviet, but like it was the same disk. He was sent off to this penal colony to be a worker out in this, nowhere scrap land. And he would stay there for 4 years. And in June of 1890, he would actually escape, not be released. He would escape Siberia by getting onto a train and take that train all the way to Hamburg, Germany, where he would rest for a bit and recharge, now out of Russia and out of the Eastern Europe, really. And he would end up taking another train to London.
Oh, great.
So, yeah, despite all the Spirit Revolution, all that, his Spirit Revolution wasn't really damaged. He was, emboldened to, fight against Russia, right? The Tsarist regime. And he joined the London-based anti-Tsarist group known as the Society of Friends of Russian Freedom.
It's a little bit of a long name, but I like the message.
Yeah, and no great acronym either. The group was small, but they would try their best to mostly send aid to revolutionary groups in Europe as opposed to directly interacting with anything. And soon after he joined, however, his close friend at the time, Sergei Stepniak, died in a railroad crossing. And I tried looking this up. I found the article about it in the newspaper at the time from London. However, it doesn't state if this had anything to do with the revolution plot or if it was an accident. But whatever it was, it did get him to finally stop being a rebel for Russia and seemingly crush his rebel spirit as he would cease revolutionary activities after this for the rest of his life. Instead, he decided to focus on his hobby, which is the topic of today's episode, which is collecting old books.
Hey, that's a safer thing to do.
Yeah, a much safer hobby, and something you could do in your spare time.
Yeah.
So Voynich would visit the British Museum and speak to the curator on their books there, who suggested that he become an antiquarian with his deep knowledge of old books. So the curator of the British Museum was impressed by Voynich's knowledge of books that he was looking at.
Cool. All right.
And acting on that advice, he did just that. And he opened his own bookshop in Soho Square, London in 1898, where he would prove to be very good and lucky at traveling Europe to acquire rare books. He even managed to travel to Italy and get a Mallarmé Bible, which, if you don't know, Mallarmé Bibles are the first Bibles to be translated from Latin. So,
I did not know that.
Yeah, actually. The Mallarmé Bible, he found this book in 1902, but they're from, medieval ages. And these Bibles are the first time common people could read Bibles.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so this was he got one. He got an original, which is a huge deal. So it got him pretty good reputation. Yeah. People in the book field are like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing, kind of thing. And for the record, at this point on, he is a very respected antiquarian. Like people... He's known. People know he knows what he's talking about. He's a professional. He has a bookshop that he sells these things out for a lot of money, able to keep it to be his main job now.
Right.
And these, 1902, Voynich would marry an Ethel Lillian Boole, and he would become a British subject on the 25th of April in 1904, taking the legal name Wilfred Mikhail Voynich.
So that's probably safer too because of all the whole Russian shit.
Yeah,
probably better to.
That's the name we know him as. Wilfred Voynich. That's what he's known as to everybody. So, yeah, he became Wilfred Voynich. And now that he was a British subject, his freedom was much greater around the country. And he was able to expand his successful book businesses. He had a couple other shops open up, and he was able to do more trips around the world without having to worry about having like a visa taken away, right? He was now able to travel freely with a British passport. So he would, in around 1912, make a trip to Italy. And in this trip, he was looking for rare books and would stop at a book auction at Via Mondragone, where he would discover his most famous find, the book that would become known as the Voynich Manuscript. But we'll get back to that in a second. I'm going to wrap up his personal history real quick. In 1914, Voynich would open his second major bookshop in New York and become heavily involved in the antiquarian book trade. And he has a number of essays and catalogs that are to this day used in colleges to teach on the subject.
Cool.
Yeah, this would also result in him staying mostly in America for the rest of his life.
Hey, good old fucking New York City, baby.
Yeah,
Welcome to the Big Apple.
Classic Fifo Goes West story going on here.
Seriously, yeah.
And this would serve as a great excuse for him to avoid the First World War as well, because he wasn't in Britain anymore and he was just in America. In 1915, he would show the Voynich Manuscript to the whole world, and in 1917, he would even be investigated by the FBI in relation to his possession to a Bacon cipher. Which I don't know if you know what that is, but the Bacon cipher is a thing that is used by Francis Bacon, basically, to decipher his maps and his writings, which he coded.
God,
and this is going to get a little...
First, my brain went immediately to pork, and I was like...
So we're going to mention the name Bacon a lot here, and there's two people in history with the last name Bacon that are important. Sir Francis Bacon was the one who was a map maker. And then there was a different Bacon, which we're going to talk about later. I won't even bring up his name now, but there's a second Bacon. This is the last time we're talking about the Explorer.
Gotcha.
The FBI investigation would basically yield absolutely nothing, but it would state that he had manuscripts from the 11th to 13th century and valued his collection at $500,000 United States dollars. Which,
at that time, that's
for 1915, that is a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
And the last we have of his life is in 1930. He died of lung cancer at Roosevelt Hospital in New York.
Oh, well.
He lived a pretty long life, 1865 to 1930. So,
not bad.
Yeah. He died right before the Great Depression really kicked off. So you didn't get to see that.
That's probably for the best.
So he, but yeah, he died of lung cancer. That's the last we knew of him. So now we know the life story of Wilfred Voynich. And we've mentioned the Voynich Manuscript a couple times. But what exactly is this book we're talking about? Which is what
I don't know.
Yeah, that's what the rest of this is going to be. We're going to now dive into this book. Not necessarily the man who it's named after. I just wanted to get that out of the way so people know who Voynich is.
Yeah, no, I like that context.
Just for the record, this book has no title, which is why it is called the Voynich Manuscript, because he's known credited for like having it in modern times.
Sure.
So let's get into it. Firstly, with the history of the book itself. Because it's important to go over what this book actually is and why it's interesting before we go into what's inside the book. Firstly, if you don't know what a manuscript is, it is a book where the text is made by hand, likely making it an original print. So this is a handwritten book. That's what a manuscript is.
Right, okay.
This particular manuscript is very old and made of vellum, which, if you don't know, is animal hide.
Fair, yeah,
it's animal hide that's so thin it looks like paper. You wouldn't think it was animal hide if you looked at it now. It has a total of 240 pages, but there is evidence inside of pages being removed. Some of the pages are foldable sheets that open up. And many of these pages are covered in wild-looking illustrations. Now, the big thing about this book, as mentioned earlier, is it is entirely written in a code. And to this day, it has no cipher, and has never been truly deciphered in any logical or sensical way. There
could be that it's just a crazy person doodling.
Unlikely, which we'll go into more about why not. But yes, people have thought that.
My job here is to toss out as many theories as I can before I get the information I need.
Yeah, which, I mean, I appreciate that, because it's going to be something we're going to talk about more.
Right. Yeah.
the history of this book is so vague as well that there is gaps that are huge, and it is difficult to track where this thing comes from and where it goes through the history.
Right. Okay.
So the intro, we read a quote from Voynich where he mentioned a cover letter attached to it. So this is a letter written by a man named Johannes Marcus Marci, who was a prominent doctor of his time in the latter half of the 17th century. And it is dated to be either 1665 or 66. We can't tell because of the handwriting. Sure. He states this book belonged to Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia.
Oh, okay.
Which isn't that, great. So Johann Marcus Marci is a name that he has a Wikipedia page, for example. Like, he's not an great historical importance, but he was a doctor who was known to operate on some major people. So he was working in higher aristocracy circles at the time. And so we can maybe take his word on this, that it belonged to the Holy Roman Emperor. The Holy Roman Emperor was from before this was from before his time. So sure, he could be getting this word from like someone he knows, or, just stuff, but he somehow managed to acquire this book after Emperor Rudolph II had it. But we got a little bit of history from this cover letter, which states that the manuscript was sold to Emperor Rudolph II for 600 ducats, which would weigh out to be about 2.07 kilograms of gold, which at the time of me writing this script, that was 63,627 United States dollars.
Okay, so pretty good chunk of change.
Yeah. So granted, gold, they had a different value system back then, it was a lot less valuable. But he paid a lot of money for this, likely. Rudolph II abdicated the throne in 1611, which makes us know the sale had to have taken place before that. We know there was a large book sale to Rudolph II in March of 1599. So this is when it's believed he bought the book. And it is thought that he bought the manuscript because he thought it to be a work of Roger Bacon. So this is the second Bacon we're going to talk about for the rest of this episode. Roger Bacon, do you know who that is?
I have no idea who that is.
So he was a Franciscan friar, and he was prominent for the science of his time because he invented what we call the scientific method. Oh. So Roger Bacon was, if you want to look into him more, I think he was killed by the church for being a heretic, that whole deal.
Yeah.
But during this time, a lot of friars and monks were the scientists. They would do a lot of stuff. A lot of our basic knowledge of science and modern science practices comes from these people. A lot of them died for it.
Right. Yeah, God bless them. No, I guess, in some ways.
God unbless them.
God unbless them.
Roger Bacon's besides the scientific method, he was also the first person to write down the formulas on how to make gunpowder explode. Oh. So, he was a science guy. He was a chemist. He did a lot of stuff like that.
I gotta admit, go fuck yourself for that one. But I mean, we would have found out anyway.
Yeah, someone else would have done it. But,
So.
So, it is very likely that Rudolph II obtained this book from John Dee. You know who John Dee it was?
No.
So, John Dee was a mathematician and astrologer in the court of Elizabeth I of England. Now, John Dee is known for a couple other things in that, and if you're listening to this and you're a big history person, you'll probably be like, oh gosh, this guy. So, in his life, he apparently owned the manuscript, maybe, potentially, along with a number of other Roger Bacon manuscripts, which is likely what was sold to Emperor Rudolph II. It's noted by his son, John Dee's son, that while traveling in Bohemia, his son recorded mentioning he owned a book with nothing but illustrations and hieroglyphics.
Oh, so that sounds pretty.
Yeah, familiar. That's what we think. We think that's the book, which kind of gives credit that John Dee did have this book.
Right.
And like I said, if you do recognize the name John Dee, it's likely because he's pretty known for being insane. In the later part of his life, after he left the court of Elizabeth I, he would gallivant all around Europe looking for scryers, diviners, and he would practice sorcery and magic.
Cool.
And he would travel with none other than Edward Kelly. Do you know who that is?
I don't.
So he's another crazy person from this time. Edward Kelly is a self-proclaimed scryer and master alchemist who, according to him, owned the Philosopher's Stone, which was a magic gem that can turn base metals into solid gold, and he advertised himself as the master of transmutation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm down with this guy.
He
sounds
failed.
kinda cool.
He failed to ever present the stone to anybody.
Oh. Wow.
But he had it, right? So.
Oh yeah.
So he was not only a friend to John Dee, but he was his chief scryer, and he would help John Dee channel the voices he was hearing, of course, which are the voices of angels, into his head via magic. So, due to Dee's, despite all that, John Dee did have meticulous journaling. Everything he did, he recorded, which is something I can appreciate in a historical sense.
That's important.
And thanks to these journals, it is also thought to be unlikely that he even sold the book because he doesn't ever mention it. So there's interesting that. So we don't know why he wouldn't do this. There's a lot of evidence that he did sell it because his son, of course, mentions the fact that he has the book at the time, 1599, when he sold books to Rudolph II. Or he was at the time he was selling books in Europe. Rudolph II was buying books. John Dee was well known and respected at this time as a mathematician and astrologer. He came from the court of Elizabeth I. So he was a known person, and it's very likely he would be high enough to be allowed to sell books to the Holy Roman Emperor. But why it wasn't recorded, if that did happen, we don't know.
Well, if he was looked at as a lunatic, maybe the Holy Roman Emperor was
I
don't want you to...
That's what I was just going to say. This could be the time where he's starting to get a little publicly loony. And the Emperor knows this guy's got books from Roger Bacon and I want them. So, let's not talk about it. It could have just been done in secret. But as far as the constructed timeline of this book's history, John Dee is the most likely seller.
Right, okay.
And this book bounced around territories of the Holy Roman Empire for quite a little while. And in 1639, we have a quote from it, from a man named Bartius, who described looking at this book as a certain riddle of the Sphinx, a piece of writing in unknown characters.
Wow, I mean, that kind of sounds about right.
Yeah. So he would also go on later in this interview, which is written in, I think it's a newspaper in Prague, that he would talk about it, saying this mysterious manuscript is likely a medical textbook. But it is uncertain if this man named Bartius, we don't know his last name, that's the only name we have, Bartius, enough to be featured in a newspaper. We don't know if he tried to decode it or not. If so, it'd be the first person historically to try that we know of. But the next update we get to this book's history is all the way until 1903. So we went from 1639 to 1903. And in 1903, the Jesuits decided to sell a group of texts from Collegia Romano to the Vatican. And the sale this sale and cataloging of books took 9 years to complete. And Wilfrid Voynich would arrive in the 9th year, 1912, just before the books made it to the Vatican, and would be allowed, due to his, status as an antiquarian bookseller, to peruse and select which books he would like to buy before they would all be locked away in the Vatican Library.
Oh, that's kind of neat.
Yes. So the Vatican Library is partially public, which is probably where this would have ended up anyway. But they decided to be like, oh, before the Vatican goes to the Vatican for permanent housing, you can take a look at stuff.
That makes sense too, because he's those types of people were, again, this was their job, so they oftentimes could sometimes figure out things about those books that other people couldn't. So that they want smart people to have them for a little while to try to figure them out more, I guess.
Yeah, and it was a known thing to our people in this field, at least. He had his feelers out. He got word that the Jesuits were selling a bunch of books to the Vatican, and as an old book, curator, you're like, oh, I want to look at some old Italian tomes, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, he went over there and did that. In the year so he would buy that in 1912, and this would be the book, of course, the Voynich Manuscript is when he would obtain it. In 1915, however, would be when he revealed the manuscript to the world. And he seemingly believed that it contained some kind of lost wisdom or technological guide from the medieval age, and would say to the Times that, quote, when the time comes, I will prove to the world the black magic of the Middle Ages consisted of discoveries far in advance of the 20th century sciences, end quote.
Hmm.
So, That was in that. So that is in the Times. You can find that interview. There's a little bit more too if you want to look up old Times, papers.
That's cool.
Yeah, but at this point, it's important to note that many people thought around this time when he was talking about it that John Dee or even his scryer Edward Kelly might have made this book themselves to spread rumors of it as a work of Bacon to make a large amount of gold, selling it to continue their crazy efforts and, being wild sorcerers.
But that doesn't add up because of how old the book is. So they were alive during the time this book was sold, but the cover letter states. So we don't really know the history before that. This is the earliest we go back is this time period. Got it. Okay. No.
So people thought that they maybe made this to make gold selling it. There was even people suspecting that Voynich himself had made the manuscript because he was a known antiquarian specialist in books, and he would have the knowledge of how to do this and be very convincing.
That's true.
It was a popular theory that the document he found, where Marcy made a gift of the manuscript in 1665 or 66, was real, but there was nothing with it, and he made the manuscript to go along with it, so that it would have a significantly higher value.
Right.
So, thankfully, for the legacy of Wilfrid Voynich, and I guess the others, whatever kind of legacy they have, we have this neat ability to tell how old things are called carbon dating.
Yeah.
And this manuscript was given the old carbon dating on the paper and the ink and the cover. And the paper and ink is dated to come from the same time in the late 15th century. So sometime between 1450 to 1500. Which places it right in the high age of the medieval era with monks and knights in shining armor. Yeah. So this is very medieval for sure. Now that it's known to not be a work of post-medieval forgery, the cover is a different story, as it was dated to come from the 1600s. So it's likely the original cover was either removed or destroyed, and it was replaced with limp vellum, which is another animal hide style of cover for back in the day.
Right.
Leather-bound books that people like to talk about. That's basically what it is. Yeah. So it was rebound sometime in the Renaissance era, likely the early 1600s. Now, this isn't uncommon for medieval books in the Renaissance because they were hardly stored properly, and covers would often get damaged after sitting on a shelf for about 100 years.
Yeah, they kind of just wither away, especially if they're made out of animal hide.
They just kind of decompose. And a lot of them, they just weren't anything from mites to dust just piling up on it would destroy it. And a lot of books are in bad condition because people in the medieval ages mostly couldn't read, and those who could weren't experts on storing old texts. So, they just kept them on shelves. They would just sit there for ages, and usually in monasteries and libraries. So after the death of Wilfrid Voynich, the book would go on between a few people trying to decipher it until its forever home was found in 1969 at Yale's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. That's where it is today. You can view it today. It's in a glass cage. It's opened up. It has been entirely scanned by Yale and available for free to view online, page by page.
Oh, wow.
So this is a fully public text because they're asking everyone in the world to try to decode this thing, basically.
Can you post a link?
I don't have a link, but if you Google...
Not right now, but maybe later.
Yeah, if you Google the Voynich manuscript scanning, it'll come up. Yale, it's all available.
I'm going to do that.
So despite Voynich wanting to unveil the deep secrets of this book to the world when he was alive, he would never be able to crack the code, and never even claimed to come close. The language of this book is now known as Voynichese, and would prove...
It sounds like a type of cheese.
It does. It does, because it literally cheese in the end. But so Voynichese has proven to be an uncrackable language, and has become known as a professional problem in the world of those who are experts in the game of coded text. Many people have claimed to have deciphered the book to this day, but when examined or really grilled about it, it's pretty much found out that's either false, mistakes, or they're just taking too many liberties to try to get an answer out of it.
Can I make an observation? So I looked it up, and it actually kind of looks like Elven in
yes, it does. It does.
It looks very much like Elven.
It does.
Elvish.
So now we're going to go into the book. We're opening up the book. And we're going to go page by page. I have some pictures to go along with it. So the book, as I mentioned earlier, is 240 pages with evidence of some pages missing, seemingly intentionally removed as well. This book is written entirely in a coded language known as Voynich, which seems very intentionally constructed to mean something. Experts have determined it does not seem like random symbols or jargon, but looks to many expert linguists and code makers as a master-crafted encrypted text. Each page is covered in text, with many of them having wild art, likely drawn by the author surrounding and sometimes even going into the text.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of it now, and it's pretty wild.
So I pulled up some pictures of the first part of the book, which we're going to talk about now, which this is called the Herbal Section. So this part of the book is the largest and covers the first half. And these pages are covered in drawings of various plants. All the plants shown are made up of leaves, roots, and seemingly all overall very botanical.
It seems pretty normal, actually.
Having drawings like this isn't super uncommon in books of this era. If you think back to old Charles Darwin texts, you would see the animals covered in drawing of plants and animals. And that's simply because there was no photography, and there was the best way to convey what you're talking about outside of describing it is just drawing it.
Right.
There's drawings of these plants being broken down into their cell structure, which I'll have a picture up right now. And this is when it gets a little weird, right? So, okay. They're drawing these plants being broken down at cellular level, and how plants are put together kind of showing in this art. Now, the microscope wasn't invented until 1600.
Right.
So how he had these rather accurate looking drawings of insides of plants, or whoever wrote this book, is unknown. But most people who could write in the medieval age, like we kind of talked about, were scientists and scholars. So it's entirely possible it was just theoretical. And he managed to be fairly accurate. The drawings are a bit weird, but as you can see, if you're looking at the screen that I had, it's image up now, and if you Google it, it's a kind of a double-sided page, and on the right page, there is these tubes in the left-hand side.
Sure. And
it looks like the breaking down layers of the cell wall of a plant.
Yeah, it does.
So that's it's fairly accurate too. Like, it's pretty accurate to what it looks like. People who've looked at it have been like, wow, this is like plant, like microscopy, microscopy. I don't know how he was doing this.
I'm if I'm not mistaken, obviously the telescope, or the microscope, wasn't invented till the 1600s, but the idea, there were different types of sciences that, because people understood that, for example, water, if the correct amount of water was positioned, you could see things closer up.
Yes.
So it's not entirely impossible.
Magnifying glasses did exist.
Right. And so, it's not impossible to assume that even just, through the right kind of droplet of water and somebody staring at it super up close might have been able to make out some very, very, small, because you can't get to, a micro level or anything like that. But you can definitely, because I remember doing stuff like this as a kid, because I loved doing this shit as a kid. I would, I actually had a microscope though, but I would just find all sorts of different things to look at under the microscope. But I remember sort of just trying to, I would, for example, one time I cut my finger on accident, but I saw it as an opportunity, so I put the blood on one of those glass scales and put it under a microscope. But I remember, afterward, trying to put it up to my eye and look as close as I possibly could. And I remember feeling as though being able to sort of see something, even tiny little specks, which I couldn't make out, but where there was blood cells, you know what I mean? I was seeing without a microscope, tiny little red blood cells, but they just looked like mere dots, basically, on tiny little specks that were so small. But I couldn't see it now. My eyes are shitty. But I remember kind of doing stuff like that. So I think it's possible that, somebody who wrote this was very much kind of doing a similar thing where they were just basically looking really hard, at stuff. So I don't know. I think it's possible a little bit. Sorry, that's my little tangent there.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. He could have definitely used some kind of magnifying glasses or other kind of spectacles to kind of get a good look at it. But it is just remarkable how accurate it is to things that he shouldn't have been able to really see.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, I that blows my mind. That's what's so fucking weird,
Now-
is that, like, to see that close up.
That might blow your mind, but this is where it gets crazy.
Yeah.
Because not a single one of these plants are real.
Oh.
So they all look real. They
Yeah,
could be real.
I was like, they look like ferns. Some of them look like ferns and shit.
But experts have gone over every plant in this book and everywhere, you know, where this book was discovered and thought to come from and everything. And there's nothing in the world that looks like the plants he's drawing.
That's weird.
Yeah. So they're very, very similar to real ones. But they have some very distinct differences that someone who's breaking down their cell structure wouldn't make by mistake.
Huh.
So like there's
Okay, well, now I'm out.
yeah. So that's the crazy part about this plant section of the book.
I was like, yeah, you could take a plant and theoretically, if you have light and a little bit of water or like a monocle of some kind of glass, you could see it. But it's like, well, the plant doesn't exist. Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're all wrong. Not a single one of these is a real plant. And that's it for the herbal section. Now we're going to go into the astrological section, which is the second book. And I pulled up a picture which you can find, which is one of the pull-out pages of the book. So this is the smallest section of the book, which is known as, like I said, the astrological section. This part is rather short, but it does contain multiple circular diagrams, which is found in multiple medieval zodiac or star chart books at a time. Most of these are pretty typical of those. They're very zodiac-ish, very star charty. Yeah. There's fold-out pages, as the one I have showing here, that shows details of what seems to be a zodiac wheel with kind of a Milky Way galaxy-esque shape in the middle of them. Maybe trying to mark something down. I don't know. But that's all I got for the astrological section. It's basically just this. Right. So the third part of the book is perhaps the most interesting. Definitely the wildest, and it is called the balneological section. So I'll pull these pictures up now and then go into detail. So this part of the manuscript shows many drawings of nude women seemingly sitting or moving through pools of some kind of green or blue liquid, which are connected to each other via a strange system of tubular plumbing that often snakes around or even in the text of whole pages.
Yeah.
These scenes resemble drawing that make modern historians believe it may have been an attempt to convey or explain something using traditional alchemical means. Or if you don't know what alchemical tradition is, it's like believing that everything's made up of earth, water, fire, air kind of thing.
Like alchemy stuff.
Yeah. If this is the case, then it disproves it as a work of Roger Bacon, because he was entirely about abandoning that idea. But this part is larger in the astrological section. It's got a lot of drawings like this. It's a bit smaller than the herbal section, but it contains some of the most interesting art that today we just don't know what this is, like what is happening here.
Right, yeah. It kind of just looks like a bunch of naked ladies hanging out in a green pond.
But and there's these weird things plugged into it that kind of look organic, but maybe not. Like
to me, they look like they're structured, like some kind of structure built. Like, not structure. That's not the right word, but like man-made or something.
It's
hard to describe.
It's very weird. It's hard to describe even what you're looking at by looking at it.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do for like the audience listener, the audio listener.
Yeah, it's like a pool with 7 naked women in it, and the water is green.
Yeah,
there's like a pipe coming down to it with like it looks like blue water coming out of the pipe, but then it comes to a Y junction. The left hand Y goes off, continuing the pipe off the page, and then the right hand goes into what kind of looks like a pine cone cut in half, turning into the water or wires going into this tube.
On the website, the Yale's website, the other side, the left side, actually continues on to do the same thing. This like half pine cone looking cut thing.
Right. Yeah.
So, but like I don't fucking know what it is.
Yeah. It's just as well as it sounds. Like I was saying, as I'm describing these images, just Google them, go to the Yale website, look at these crazy pages. It's wild. So the final part of the book seems to be instructions or recipes for practical uses of plants from the herbal section of the book.
Sure. Okay.
Usually showing images of the herbal section as it goes, with text kind of broken down into recipe or instructional format. But that's and it's small, but it's the very end of the book. Now, we've gone over what's in the book in as much as we can. You see the text looks crazy. It looks like, kind of like you said, it looks like Elvish in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
The art is very, very medieval looking art. It's definitely not done by an artist of Renaissance standard. So it's a medieval book. So that's basically all we have to talk about what's in the book. So I'm going to now go over what people did to try to crack the code of this book.
Oh, okay.
And the attempts that people have made to crack the code of this book. So Voynich himself never would crack it, but many others have certainly tried. An essay listed as cryptographic attempts by William Sherman regarding the manuscript states that some of the greatest codebreakers in history attempted to crack the code, and he kind of records what happened. So I'm kind of going in I guess chronological order.
Sure.
So William Romaine Newbold, the professor of intellectual and moral philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania in the early part of the 20th century, stated, quote, "The writing used both a cipher common from Bacon's alchemical manuscripts along with a separate and far more complicated system, best described as an anagrammed micrographic shorthand." Now, that probably doesn't make a lot of sense, because it doesn't to me.
Yeah, that's a lot of jargon.
A lot of technical jargon. So he says the system of Cipher requires transposition, abbreviation, and microscopic notation. So what this means in common words is this language has an order of letters, which changed using a Greek-style system of making one word mean multiple words or longer words, which is a very common way to write code. So basically, you're writing a fake language that uses the Greek language style, which is kind of like what we use now, where a short word can mean a whole sentence, for example. And the other half he mentioned is it would use microscopic pen strokes, changing what certain letters or words mean, visible only under magnifying glass.
No fucking way. So
this theory was initially endorsed by medievalist John Matthew Manley, who had worked as one of the U.S. Army's chief cryptologists during the First World War. But when looked into closer, Manley ended up disagreeing and saying that those coding discoveries were part of Newbold's, quote, intense enthusiasm and learned and ingenious subconscious, end quote. So basically saying the guy got too excited and just made up a bunch of shit.
Okay, that happens. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So he looked at it under a microscope and just said, "No, I don't think so," kind of thing.
Okay.
In 1925, Manley would connect William F. Friedman and his wife, who were both professional cryptographers, to this project by sending them photos of the manuscript. And they would work on this book for 40 years. The next 40 years, these professional cryptographers were trying to break this book. So during World War II, which happened after they were already working on this book, Friedman became famous for breaking Japan's code purple. And he would become the chief cryptanalyst for the War Department and head of Signals Intelligence Service in the 40s and 50s. And he was even called the world's greatest cryptologist by the historian David Kahn, who's a modern historian. So this guy knows his stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. In 1944, Friedman had founded the Voynich Manuscript Study Group with some of his colleagues. Wow. So this was during World War II. And so basically they were working, they weren't in the field. These were cryptologists working back in America or military bases in the Pacific, receiving code and then trying, to decipher it all.
Right.
Or after they'd already found the cipher, in the case of code purple, just encrypting all their messages they got. He decided to get some of the other cryptologists on their team, and his wife back home, or off military base, would also have some of her, friends and colleagues all working on this at the same time. So more viewpoints, more people going over it. So The Friedmans did speak on this manuscript in an article, and this is why I'm laughing. This sounds like the most boring thing in the world. They spoke on the topic in an article in Philological Quarterly, Acrostics, Anagrams, and Chaucer. I guess it's like a quarterly magazine on codes for the code breaking community. That just sounds so specific to such a niche audience of people. Like,
yeah, I bet that's still going strong today.
It is. I looked it up. It's still going.
Never mind. I was being facetious.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, cool, guys. Sorry. Total respect. Love you. Keep doing your good work. Okay, bye.
It's I guess people like code breaking. Like, it's a common thing. Like, I love it in like game sense. Like, there's a game I love called The Black Watchman, which has a little bit of code breaking, but it's like it's meant for you to solve. Like, this kind of
the new Batman movies got plenty of that.
Exactly. Like, that kind of stuff is fun. It's fun detective stuff. Right. But like going into this is like the most like niche professional thing in the world.
Yeah, holy shit.
Anyway, so this book, this magazine, this issue was published in 1959, and in the article, the Friedmans, husband and wife, included a long message on the pointlessness of looking for anagrammatic ciphers. And this message would later be revealed to be an anagram. And the authors had left the solution for this anagram in a sealed envelope with the Philological Quarterly editor, and this would not be discovered and opened until William Friedman died in 1970.
Oh, shit.
And they opened this up and uncoded their own thing they didn't know was coded from their coding, magazine.
So, like,
which is so so meta. Yeah. it's like inscriptions levels of decoding. And this note stated that the Voynich it says, quote, the Voynich MS was an early attempt to construct an artificial or universal language of a priori type. Signed, Friedman, unquote. That's what the message was decoded unto. So,
okay,
this was the last words of Friedman ever revealed, I guess, and it notes that that's what he thinks. He thinks the Voynich Manuscript was the attempt of somebody in the medieval ages to create a universal language. Oh. Now, that's not impossible, for sure.
That seems practical, too.
Yes. Also, this book came from Europe, and which we know for sure based on the ingredients in the ink. Like, we know it came from Europe.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And it's possible there were so many during the medieval Europe. If you look at a map of medieval Europe, it looks like someone got a bunch of paint and just flicked it in different colors on a continent, because there's like 500 countries in Europe. Like, everyone wanted to be their own king, right? So it's just like every city is a country almost. So it's like, and they had languages. So it's very reasonable that some medieval monk was like, you know what, guys, let's just make a language that we can all agree on and speak in, because we can't keep learning all these different languages. Like, it's insane.
That's a good theory, but there's not a lot of religious context to this, except for maybe the astrological section. But even that's very like.
What do you mean religious?
Well, you said like a monk might.
A monk likely did write the book, yes, because they were probably the only people who knew how to write in this time.
That's fair.
Like, and keep in mind, like Roger Bacon also was a monk, and we'll get more into the theories about who wrote this in a little bit, but assuming it's a monk. We all assume a monk wrote this somewhere.
Right.
So William Sherman continues on his essay about this to say that most people who look at the manuscript now are more interested in conspiracy theories than cracking the code itself.
Right.
Which is true. And theories on a codex for this run wild and go all over the place. And it doesn't help that we don't know who the author is. So like we just mentioned, we know the author, but this has caused many different minds to look at it due to how public it is. And may one day kind of prove to be the solution of it, just how many people are able to look at this book. So according to the codebook cipher theory, the words are actually codes that need to be looked up in a code book. And this is honestly, in my opinion, the most likely answer, which would explain why it's untranslated, because we don't have the code book and maybe never will. It could have been destroyed. Yeah. It could have never been fully established by the author. He could have died before finishing the code book.
Sure.
If this book still exists, it means there's a book out there that until it's found, this is going to never be solved.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's probably gone, honestly.
Yeah. So the main evidence of this theory is that the structure and length and distribution of many words are similar to Roman numerals, which would be at the time how people would make a code.
Right.
This would, however, prove to be the longest book ever written in code to a ludicrous extent, which is why a lot of people think it's not a code book writing, because it's too long. It's too much for a code book. Code books or writings are things you do for like writing on a painting or signing a painting with, or like writing on a small letter and like 10 sentences. Where it's like, the raven flies at midnight. Like, that's a coded sentence, you know what I mean? Where it's like, that means like we're going to kill someone, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
This seems like almost like a textbook.
Yeah, 100%.
Like
100%.
So.
When people are saying, like, if someone wrote that in code, especially back then, it would take an entire lifetime to finish.
Seriously.
If it was using a code book, that is. Like, it was so much like checking back on your own code book and stuff like that, it would take so long. So
again, the fucking fictional plants is what blows my mind. Like, it's just so like, what is it? Just a story for kids almost? You know what I mean? Like, was this just made? Is it just like a fantasy?
Yeah,
thing?
We'll go into theory about that a little bit.
Sure,
but keep in mind, like I mentioned, only monks can read and write.
Yeah, that's true.
So, the next named person we haven't looked at it, which was during the lifespan of Friedman, we talked about before, was in 1943. Sure. A man named Joseph Freely claimed the manuscript was a scientific diary written entirely in shorthand and Latin shorthand. So it was a Latin language. It was just Latin shorthand. This is widely rejected, and experts in Latin have looked at it now and said that's just not true. This guy made this claim without ever providing a translation. So exactly. So it's just I just put that in there just to throw in. Even in the 40s, people were just trying to get famous off of saying they figured it out.
Right, of course.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is steganography. So steganography is a theory that holds that the text is meaningless, but contains a bit of meaningful information hidden in inconspicuous details. For example, the second letter of every word may add up to mean something. It is suggested that the meaningful text could be encoded in the length or shape of certain pen strokes.
Oh my goodness.
There is clues that add up to this in the book. However, when looked at under a microscope by many modern people, it is determined that these things that people thought were pen strokes or different breaks in the text are natural and not planned and actually just cracked ink over the age. So people think,
that again makes more sense.
Yeah, people think like, oh, he added in like a little dot on the end. Like, no, it's likely it's just like if you look at it under a microscope, like it looks like it was one stroke that the ink has cracked and fallen off over the ages. You know what I mean? Like,
sure. And
that's such a little detail that, again, without a compound microscope, you can't do steganography in that sense.
Sure.
Like, you need a very, very intense microscope. So there's also a theory put forward by a linguist named Jacques Guy, which is the most French name I've ever heard in my life, that it is actually a natural language similar to Vietnamese, and it has been suggested to be a manuscript of North German dialect.
Oh.
So those are two very different points in the world. So I don't know what...
Yeah.
We don't know what Jacques Guy is trying to really say about this. But it seems like the language does bear a lot of written similarities to Vietnamese. However, it's a more modern-looking Vietnamese than the Vietnamese at this time.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Which I believe would be technically the language Siamese at the time, because I think it was part of Vietnam was under the banner of Siam at the time, I believe.
Yes, I think that is true.
But you look at that and you look at Vietnamese, it still doesn't look right.
No,
but he does believe. So he went back and said Northern German dialect. So I don't know what that means. Like, is it maybe someone from North Germany trying to write in North German dialect a Vietnamese script? Maybe.
I mean, that could very well be. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like a monk that was writing and trying something for their kingdom. You know, like you
Yes.
said, every little tiny city has like its own kingdom, and
Yeah, so it
this
could
could very
be
well have
yeah,
been like a manuscript for a kingdom.
it could be a monk from somewhere in northern Germany writing a book for some other person in like Siam at the time, you know?
Yeah.
And so he
Right.
wrote it, but the sentence structure is done in a North German dialect because he doesn't speak Vietnamese. He's just writing down from maybe a list of how they write kind of thing, you know, which will also make sense
Sure.
as to why it doesn't look right. So that's a theory out there. A lot of people don't believe it because it's just too different from Vietnamese. Like it's just not similar enough. Like it's just
Right.
it's
Again,
it's way too
it looks
wildly
like
different.
Elvish.
Yeah, yeah. So in February 2014, Stephen Bax of the University of Bedfordshire made public his research into the manuscript, which he tried to look for and translate proper nouns in association with irrelevant illustrations in the context of all languages in the time period it was written. So he made a paper about this. He posted online, which shows a tentative translation of 14 characters and 10 words, and he suggests that it is a treatise written on nature in a natural language rather than a code. So what that means is he thinks it's not coded text; it's just a language that we don't know. Like from
That's some pagan
an
shit.
area in Europe, likely an area in Europe that simply was so short-lived and so like minor,
Right.
like a small city in Europe, like I said, that just decided I want to be my own country and have a king and make a language. You know,
We're gonna make our own language up. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So that's what they think that could be. So people have looked at that theory and said no, that is not the case. People looked at everything he said is translated, found hundreds of errors with it, saying that words he claimed translated didn't contain letters that he had translated already. So kind of like, are you just making stuff up? Like, he's a professor at a university, so like he's not like dumb, but it's just like
Right.
it's people who are expert code breakers and historians and experts in the time period have looked at it and said that is incorrect. So official historians have said that theory is not right. Also in 2014, Tucker and Talbert, I don't know what that is, published a paper claiming to positively identify 37 plants, 6 animals, and 1 mineral in the manuscript to plant drawings in the Libius de Medicinalibus Indorum Urbis, or known as the Brandis manuscript, which is a 15th century manuscript on Aztec plants used in herbal medicine. So this... Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So this theory does have a little bit of things to back it up with, because chemically analyzing the dye has found the presence of atacamite, which is a mineral only present in Central and South America.
That would be absolutely wild.
So
if that was the case.
Well, what this is saying is not that it's from Central South America, but that this is during the time of the Discovery era, when that place was being, looked at. So they would have brought this back and maybe brought back plants. And maybe he was writing about the plants and other stuff and the cultures that he was hearing stories about from the Aztecs,
Right.
because this was written like during the time of Aztecs basically being destroyed by the Spanish.
Yeah.
So like they were still around and they were known as
Thanks,
like,
smallpox. So,
yeah, and guns.
Well, guns too.
So they also argue that the plants found in this area were from colonial New Spain, aka the Aztec Empire, and the text is in fact Nahuatl, which is the native language of the Aztecs. So the Aztecs didn't have a written language, so that's a bit of a weird thing to say. Also, they date the manuscript between 1521 to 1576. Which these dates contradict with radiocarbon dating of the vellum and other elements in the manuscript. However, they argue the vellum could have been stored and used at a later date. So,
That's true.
Maybe
This manuscript could have been worked on years later.
Yes, exactly.
Not be just
they're saying the vellum could have been medieval made, and then someone found it, and you're not going to waste it, so you use it.
Yeah, of course.
So that's that theory, which is that's heavily criticized. People argue that the contradiction of the date and the vellum and the radiocarbon dating doesn't add up enough to make it a valuable theory to really be taken seriously. But maybe it's not a fully dismissed theory like the other ones we talked about.
Right.
There is also a theory of it being a constructed language, as mentioned by William Friedman in his notes, who thinks it was the first attempt at a universal language. The concept of this idea goes back to 1668 in John Wilkins' philosophical language, which was the first dated attempt ever at a universal language back in 1668, which is it's a couple hundred years after, but maybe someone tried it beforehand.
Sure.
So it does it's 200 years, later, but still, in a constructed language, the rule is that most words have a matching prefix, such as all plants starting with one letter, all minerals starting with one letter, etc. That kind of thing. That's how that's the rules for writing this. So no one has been able to assign any plausible meaning to prefixes or suffixes in the manuscript. But again, this was written 200 years before anyone decided to try to make rules on universal languages. So who knows?
Sure.
So that's everything I have on the code breaking part of it.
Right.
And then I have another little thing I want to go over. Is it a hoax? Because many people still believe it is a hoax. They believe that this manuscript has defied too many attempts to be fully translated by too many great experts throughout history. And it makes people think there is nothing important in this text, like you mentioned earlier. In 2003, a computer scientist named Gordon Rugg showed the text with characteristics similar to the Voynich Manuscript, basically copying it down, and put it through let's see what they did. It could have been produced using a series of prefixes, stems, suffixes, which would have been selected and combined by means of perforated paper overlay. So, what that means...
What?
Yeah. There is a device called the Cadian Grail, or Cadian Grail, and this was invented in 1550 as an encryption tool. 100 years after the date of the Voynich Manuscript's radiocarbon dating again. But this is the biggest argument against this, despite the 100-year difference that the computer program, that they put this in a computer program, and it came up with the fact that it was nonsense. So a computer couldn't decipher it, and the computer came up with a Cadian Grail encryption algorithm for it. What the Cadian Grail is basically, it's a piece of paper you put over something with different writing on it to make a full language.
Oh, okay.
So it's like a coding tool, basically.
Sure.
But that wasn't invented until 100 years after the carbon dating of the book.
Sure.
So that's how the computer thinks it did, and they think that people argue that a computer could come up with that you could just slap a keyboard and the computer will come up with that as a possible answer. So a lot of experts are kind of like, you can't prove it with a computer because it wasn't made in an age of computer thinking. It's too old for a computer to fully understand where it comes from.
Sure.
So next we have in April 2007, a study by Andres Schiener, an Austrian researcher, published in Cryptologia, which I think is a magazine again for these kind of people, said it was a hoax, showing that the statistical properties of the manuscript were more consistent with meaningless gibberish than real words. That's all he says. Why he thinks so, we don't know, but this is another researcher claiming it's a hoax. Some claim the text is too sophisticated and advanced to be a hoax, like I said.
That's what I think.
Yeah. A theoretical physicist from the University of Manchester, Marcello Montemuro, publishes findings claiming that the semantic networks exist in the text of the manuscripts, such as similar words occurring in clusters or new words being used to shift when a topic change occurs, such as the images changing on the page. This is thought to be highly unlikely to be put into a hoax document, as it required academic knowledge of the base language structures that did not exist at the time of the Voynich manuscript, and this would have been written way before people had a mastery of writing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All people were doing back then was writing Bibles. So it was in scientific papers and how great God is. So it's unlikely that people didn't have this mastery of language, just do a fake language like this.
Right.
So and like you said, it looks like Elvish, and Tolkien's Elvish is a fake language made with all these rules, which is why it works as a real language. So
Yeah.
again, it looks too real. It's too well thought out.
I think people who, no offense to these experts, but people who are saying that it's all just a hoax and silly nonsense, I think that they're just giving up and they're like, they'd rather just not pay attention to it.
Agreed, 100%. They just don't want to exist because they're not smart enough to figure it out.
Yeah, honestly. No offense, guys.
Yeah. So in 2004, a book was written by Gary Kennedy and Rob Churchill, suggesting the manuscript would be a case of glossolalia. Do you know what that is?
I have no idea.
So this is the scientific term for speaking in tongues.
Oh, okay.
This suggests that the author would have felt forced or compelled to write something which resembles a stream of consciousness, either because of voices in his head or an urge. So when people hear voices in their head and they write like pages and pages of stuff about it, that's called glossolalia. That's the name of the effect, you know. And
sure, that could be very well it.
Yeah. So they usually write out voices in their head in invented languages. However, they normally contain heavy traces of structure and shape to whatever the individual's language of choice, like their base language is.
Right.
Which is something the Voynich Manuscript does not do. They compare his works that of Hildegard von Bingen, which I don't know if you know them. She was an artist who suffered from bouts of migraine, which can cause one to be prone to glossolalia. Both feature prominent streams of stares and repetitive nature of quote-unquote nymphs, referring to the nude women in his Astrological section.
Right.
This theory is found to be highly unlikely by most researchers due to its incredible length and detail the manuscript has. But it does have no way to be disproven.
Sure.
In the end of
I never saw that as the naked ladies as nymphs. I always kind of saw them as like they're participating in something.
Agreed. It looks a bit more scientific than nymphs to me.
Right. You're right. Yeah.
The end of the book that Kennedy and Churchill wrote says that Kennedy says he thinks it's a hoax, but Churchill thinks it's possible that it's a synthetic or forgotten language, which is something we've talked about before. So, you know, more theories out there. So last, I'm going to go down a timeline, the last part of this episode of the decipherment, until I talk about what I kind of think it is.
Cool.
So this is going to be a chronological timeline of people trying to decipher it. 1921, William Romaine Newbold of the University of Pennsylvania claimed they deciphered the book, that the visible text was useless, but each letter constructed a series of tiny markings discernible only under magnification, which we mentioned earlier. He said they were based on Greek shorthand, yada yada. We went over it, determined it wasn't really the case. He claimed also that his book was written by Roger Bacon, which many people believe it was not. Because it just doesn't match his writing style. Like the handwriting is different, you know? That he also believed that Newbold claimed the pictures of the astrological section were of the galaxy, which means he would need a telescope, which didn't really exist at the time. They kind of did, but not really.
Right, yeah.
And he was the first person to bring up the cells being something you'd have to see through a microscope, which the 1920s was kind of the microbiology golden age. People were really starting to look into it. So,
sure,
you know, didn't really, you know, that's why he probably brought it up. So,
right.
His analysis has been reviewed as pure speculation. John Manley, the University of Chicago, pointed out serious flaws that we talked about before. His method would require rearranging letters at will until intelligible Latin was produced, meaning almost any word could be made with enough effort. Closer examination revealed the artifacts and letters to be no more than crackings of the ink on rough vellum, which we talked about before.
Right.
Making the Newbold theory has now fully been disregarded. 1943, Martin Freely published the book Roger Bacon's Cipher, The Right Key Found, in which he claimed the book was a scientific diary written by Roger Bacon. Freely claimed that the text was highly abbreviated medieval Latin, written in a simple substitution cipher. This has since been tried by many people, but no results have ever been come of it, and Freely never came up with any answers himself. So whatever he thought was basically just now believed to be incorrect, and he was just writing it down to sell his book.
Yeah.
So next we got
capitalist pig. So just kidding.
Basically, though, like he's like, oh yeah, I solved this too because I'm so good. Buy my book. It's
right.
In 1947, Lionel C. Strong, a cancer research scientist and amateur cryptographer, believed that to solve the Voynich manuscript, you need to use a peculiar double system of arithmetical progressions of a multiple alphabet, unquote. Which means, got it. This is some of the most like jargon I've ever written down. And when I was like looking at the quotes, I'm like, my God. So this basically claims that the plain text revealed that the Voynich manuscript was written in the 16th century by English author Anthony Ascham. So this guy claims he knew the author, who works include A Little Herbal, published in 1550, who, again, a very similar book with written plants in it. Notes released after the death of Strong, however, reveal that the method he used in late stages of his analysis were extremely questionable and seemed rushed, and, on top of that, experts believe mostly made up.
Oof.
So, looking at his notes after his death, it just kind of came to be he was doing nonsense to kind of solve it, and it just doesn't make sense. And Anthony Ascham was born a century after the book was carbon dated. The ink was carbon dated. So, Anthony Ascham didn't write that ink. Next, we got 1978 with a Robert Brumbaugh, a professor of medieval and classical philosophy at Yale University, who claimed that the manuscript was a forgery intended to fool Emperor Rudolph II into purchasing it, and that the text is Latin and ciphered with a complex two-step method, but he never published any results or proof of this. This was just a claim out of nowhere. So, I don't know why he would say that. No one does, but there you go. He's dead now, so we can't ask him. In 1978, John Stojko published Letter to God's Eyes, in which he claimed the Voynich manuscript was a series of letters written in vowelless Ukrainian. And this theory caused some sensation among the Ukrainian people. However, this method is seemingly just as wrong as the last one, as it doesn't match basic Ukrainian at the time of it being written, and when loosely translated this way, it doesn't make any sense or relate to any of the images, and is all over just too loose to be taken seriously. So that was 1978. So the next time we get attention to translation was 2014. So it's been a long time. When Stephen Bax, which we talked about before, applied linguistics. He's an applied linguistics professor, and self-published a paper claiming to have translated 10 words. We talked about it before. But to go in a little more detail, he claims the words were used. He used the techniques used to translate Egyptian hieroglyphs, and claimed the manuscript was a treatise on nature. We talked about it before. But no translation was made before his death in 2017, and his notes were never found. But even then, people do believe that it's just not wrong. It's just not right, and there never have even been notes. He might have just been bullshitting.
Fair.
Because people have since tried to use the hieroglyphic translation technique to absolutely no success.
Right.
In September of 2017, Nicholas Gibbs, who was a television writer, claimed to have decoded the manuscript as idiosyncratically abbreviated Latin. He declared the manuscript to be mostly a plagiarized guide to women's health, and many scholars have claimed this work to be false, and Gibbs has been heavily criticized for his translation, being a patchwork of other people's attempts, and claiming that he had something he didn't, and he has lost a lot of work as a television writer because of this.
Oh, my.
Lisa Fagan Davis, director of the Medieval Academy of America, she's kind of like the Voynich manuscript, like, authority, not on translating it, but on disproving translations, because she knows how people wrote during this time. So she's the one who people go to like, what do you think of it? Like this, kind of thing. And she'll be like, oh, stupid. So she saw his translation, and say that Gibbs's decipherment doesn't result in a Latin that makes sense and is written by a fool. So burn.
Yeah, seriously.
In 2017, Greg Kondracht, professor of natural language processing at the University of Alberta, and his graduate student Bradley Hauer, used computational linguistics in an attempt to decode the manuscript. Their findings were presented at the annual meetings of Association for Computational Linguistics in 2017. Super exciting stuff. In the form of an article suggesting that the language of the manuscript is most likely Hebrew. But
nerds! Sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. But encoded using alphagrams, which are alphabetically ordered anagrams. However, the team admitted that the experts in medieval manuscripts who reviewed their efforts were not convinced. Yeah. So they came up with a theory, basically. This could be what it is. But people were like, I don't know, the experts, and were kind of questioning it.
Sure.
2018, Ahmet Ardik, an electrical engineer with an interest in Turkic languages, claimed in a YouTube video that the Voynich script is some kind of old Turkic video written in poetic style. He would submit this translation attempt to the Journal of Digital Theology, and it was officially rejected in 2019. So whatever he had...
Sorry, man.
Yeah, wasn't that solid.
Sorry, bro.
Yeah. In 2019, Gerard Cheshire, a biology research assistant at the University of Bristol, made headlines for his theory that the manuscript was written in, quote, calligraphic proto-romance, unquote, languages. He claimed to have deciphered the manuscript in only 2 weeks, using a combination of lateral thinking and ingenuity, unquote.
Oh, wow, what a fucking smart guy.
Exactly. That's what the rest of the world thought. Cheshire has suggested the manuscript is a compendium of information of herbal remedies, therapeutic bathing, and astrological readings, and that it contains numerous descriptions of medicinal plants and passages that focus on female physical and mental health, reproduction, and parenting, and that the manuscript is only known text written in Proto-Romance. He further claimed, quote, the manuscript was compiled by Dominican nuns as a source of reference for Maria of Castile, Queen of Aragon, unquote.
That is so bold. I mean, some of that stuff, I admit, as I've been looking at the pictures over and over again, I'm like, I do think that clearly there's some feminine thing going on here because there's tons of naked ladies everywhere. Yes. But it doesn't, again, the whole nymph thing is out because it seems like they're doing something for themselves, like some sort of therapeutic thing. The herbs, I understand. I get that. Again, all these different plants. Literally, the one that just passed on my screen, it had the 5 different types of plants with paragraphs basically underneath. It literally looks like it's this thing can be used for this.
100%.
That's literally what it looks like.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah.
So he also claimed that the fold-out illustration on page 158, which depicts a volcano, and theorizes that this places the manuscript's creators near the island of Volcano, which was an active volcano, only island that had an active volcano during the 15th century in the area. However, experts in medieval documents disputed his interpretation vigorously, with the executive director of Medieval Academy of America, Lisa Fagan Davis, we talked about before, denouncing the paper in its entirety by Cheshire as, quote, just more aspirational, circular, and self-fulfilling nonsense, unquote. When she was asked for a comment by Ars Technica, she stated this: as with most would-be Voynich interpreters, the logic of this proposal is circular and aspirational. He starts with a theory about what a particular series of glyphs might mean, usually because the word's proximity to an image that he believes he can interpret it. He then investigates any number of medieval Romance language dictionaries until he finds a word that seems to fit his personal theory. Then he argues that because he has found a Romance language word that fits the hypothesis, his hypothesis has to be correct. His translations, quote-unquote, from what is essentially gibberish, an amalgam of multiple languages, are themselves aspirational rather than being any actual translation. End quote.
This
so basically,
lady is horse.
Yeah, she's savage, but she needs to be because when all these internet people are just starting to claim to decipher this,
Let me strike a poke at her too. It seems like she wants to be the one to figure it out.
She actually does not attempt or try to. She just wants to make sure people don't bullshit it. You know what I mean? I respect her because I think she is adamantly trying to be the wall against people on the internet, trying to be important. Like, this is what it is, you know? Because otherwise... Yeah, otherwise people could just go more wild with it. And she's like, no, I'm the expert, you're wrong. Someone needs to fact check you. And that's what she's doing, basically.
That's actually good, because from what it sounded like before you said that, was it like she just seems like, no, I know, and it's just like, no.
Yeah, she has no...
If she's literally just like, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I looked that up too to see what her deal is. She has never once attempted translation. So it's not like she's trying, you know what I mean? She's just trying she knows how people translate stuff. She knows she can't do it, but she's going to check anyone who tries, you know what I mean?
That's important. That's what journalists are supposed to do.
Exactly. So the University of Bristol, after this interview with Ars Technica, quickly and subsequently removed all references to Cheshire's claims from its website, stating this research was entirely the author's own work and not affiliated with the University of Bristol School of Arts nor the Center of Medieval Studies, unquote. So this guy, they're just like, no, he's an idiot. Take it down, because they had his paper on there, and they're like, yeah. So it's like, yeah. So no. Yeah, that's the latest attempt at big translations of the book.
Damn.
So to wrap it up, I'm going to talk about what people generally think it is. Right. Number one theory: a book on herbology, astrology, and women's health. Likely all connected to each other, because astrology and herbology back in the medieval ages were considered to be very, very, very real, effective ways at curing any kind of health issue, right?
Sure, yeah.
And all these drawings of naked women and these weird pools, maybe he's trying to draw like a uterus? You know, that maybe that Y junction was his attempt at drawing ovaries? I don't know.
Some of the women do look preggers.
Yes, 100%. 100%. Yeah. Like, so it's like, it's women's health is a big thing. I think it is. And another thing to throw in, why would you write it in code? Because if you were a monk writing about women's health, you'd probably get killed in a cross.
Yeah, that's true, because that's super sinful.
Yeah.
Talking about women's bodies, are you fucking kidding me?
So here's two things I talk about, I believe. Earlier, I talked about believing that this has a code book to go with it, to translate it.
Right.
And secondly, believing that I just mentioned it's a women's health manuscript. Those two things could be used together with groups of women to avoid persecution. Like, this guy wrote it in code, and he supplies the code book and the book to, say, a nun group to help, take care of themselves. Like, someone tried to look into women's health and not get killed for it, because that's what happens in the medieval ages. You do that kind of thing. So, that's my personal theory that I believe.
Yeah, back then, women were the devil. So.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of, yeah. So, the other theory is that the involvement of the history of the book involving one Edward Kelly makes it possible this has something to do with mysticism and the occult. Maybe it's showing you how to make the Philosopher's Stone,
That's cool.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Probably not. But, it's just people think it might have a very heavy, magic-based, idea.
Yeah.
Like some occult, which is why a monk would write it in code, again, to hide being killed.
I do think that that's very likely. Again, I'm with you on the women's health thing. Obviously, since, like you said, a monk wrote it, he was probably scared for it could have been more than one, too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It could have been, multiple people. So, and they're all like, hey, let's look out for our ladies, because this is ridiculous. And then...
Yeah.
But...
So...
I don't know.
The third and final theory that I'm going to go over is a monk was abducted by aliens. Now, this is a very actually heavily believed theory by alien abduction people who go into that heavily. Everything from the star charts to the fake plants. Maybe those fake plants are just things he saw on a different planet.
Right.
Maybe all these drawings of the weird looking tubes and stuff are alien technology he saw.
Yeah,
that could be it. That's a very popular theory among people who believe in alien abduction, and the fact that
here at Lore Lords we don't like talking shit about the people who think they got abducted by aliens.
No, I am, until it happens to me, I'll never say I fully believe it. So that's my stance on most things. So, but I believe it's possible. And if we're going to go
Sure.
into that wild realm of theory, yeah, he does have some crazy stuff. Maybe he looked through a microscope on an alien ship at one of these plants.
Right, could have.
Maybe that's why he has
saw
it.
tiny little naked ladies inside of a cell wall.
Maybe-
because it almost looks like a cell wall. I want to point out.
Yeah.
Like in
Yes,
picture with
it does. 100%, yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe he,
yeah.
maybe he saw...
I've got it.
Oh, yeah, what? Say it.
Women are aliens. That's it.
All right, that's the end of Lords Forever, because we solved the world's greatest mystery. So
Pat's lost his fucking mind. And no,
aliens
of course not.
are
No, I don't know.
aliens from Venus called women. Oh my God, you're right. You make so much sense.
Exactly, and men are from hell. Anyway,
No, but yeah, if you believe in that,
Obviously not,
sure.
yeah.
I think this is a thing. You know, maybe.
I do think the most realistic. Again, I think the most logical thing is that it was an early attempt at women's health and like apothecary type situations, like you know, like with the different plants.
Yeah.
The funny, the one that's like the one picture with the ladies that I don't understand is that like it looks like there's women sliding down a slide into a pool, but some of them are stepping into the pool.
Yeah.
Like maybe
So,
it's a pool full of chlorophyll.
Some people
something.
theorized
It's
that
green.
what that specifically image is showing is that it is a image of how women get pregnant, and they're using because they don't know what sperm is at that time, and they're using the women or the green liquid as showing that, like baby juice,
Right.
you know, like
Oh no.
like going through tubes, right? Like think about it, like going through the tubes, like it, you know, it kind of, I see where they're going with that.
Right.
So like it's, you know, it's wild.
Yeah.
Maybe he was an alien. I personally believe it's just a woman's health book. He was trying to hide it so he wouldn't get killed. Maybe he did get killed in the end, and that's why
We don't have
you don't have the code
Cipher.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, the code.
All that's
yeah.
great. All this women's health stuff is great, but why are the plants not real?
That's
That is the
fucking
number
weird as
one thing
hell.
we have to go back to. Those are not plants
Yeah.
that exist on our
Those are-
planet. Like,
Yeah, some of them look real, but like that. Sorry, I'm a bit delayed because I was
Right, yeah.
watching your stream. It's a few seconds, but like the one page that has fuckloads of different plants on
Yes.
it and just a few paragraphs. Those plants look out of this world.
yeah,
There's
the
one that
red,
has,
the
like-
red and the blue.
Oh, those things look insane. Yeah, those ones. No, that's not the one I saw. But yes, those ones as well.
Oh, you
Those
mean
ones almost look
the
like-
double page image with the books, the plants on both sides.
Right. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Because there's that one page that has the paragraphs. Those
Yes.
plants look like totally ones you'd find on Earth. But
Yeah,
then the
they
ones with,
they do.
Yeah.
But then, like when you look at them, you realize like they're still wrong. Like the leaves are shaped wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
things are shaped wrong. And it's like, why would a guy who knows this much about plant stuff draw that?
Yeah, and like even the way that some of the looks like the leaves are growing out look.
Yes,
wrong.
100%.
But, like,
Yeah.
Yeah, and again that I like the red and blue one. It looks like a plant, but part of me thinks it's something else too. But I don't know. That's just because I have an imagination that probably is that of a 6-year-old. but, but yeah, and the astrology thing looks that one I'd like to look into. Like the astrology, I'd like to take the astrology section, go to an actual like astrologist and astronomer, both all of it, all of the above, and be like, does this have any pattern or looking from Earth?
So it
Like,
does. So people have looked at it, and it does. It looks like a very standard. I kind of mentioned it, a very standard medieval style star chart. Like other star charts at the time look extremely similar in the wheel shape.
Okay.
So it looks like it's a
but is
star.
it-
Here's the thing that I'm just gonna
Yeah.
say: it looks like a star chart.
Right.
It's got writing like a star chart. He drew stars on it, right? So I can assume it's a star chart. Is he writing it on here because he's saying that's where these plants come from? Is he pointing to something in a star chart? Like it's,
Right.
and the middle image on the star chart pullout is broken up into the zodiac wheel.
Yeah.
So it's like it's it's a bit weird.
Oh man, that is.
So
I think it's a map to the Fountain of Youth. No, I'm kidding.
could be maybe the fountain uses the green sludge pool.
There's been a lot of talk about chlorophyll helping out with women's reproductive systems, and green is often depicted as chlorophyll. I'm just saying,
Yeah,
the
well, I mean,
loosest
also
connection I
all
can
the
make.
writing of plants, all the plant drawings. I mean, chlorophyll.
Yeah.
Maybe
yeah,
he made the water
right.
green because he didn't have access to blue ink. It could be something as simple
Maybe.
as that, like we just
Could be
don't know.
something as simple as that. Right.
He uses blue ink in the book, so it seems like he did. Like the astrological section
Yeah.
has blue ink on it, so I don't know.
Yeah.
And the
And
plant, of course.
the green looks like it's written in crayon.
Yeah,
but...
it does, right? But that's just again medieval art. That's as good as they were at the time.
Hey, they did their best.
Yeah, but yeah, we could theorize about this all day. But that's basically it. That's the Voynich Manuscript.
God, yeah, that is wild. Again, the red like it looks like 3 or 4 red leaves of some kind, or suns almost, and then a blue sun on top. But again, it looks like a plant. I'm just so like, I don't know, man. My brain hurts. But
Yeah, so you learned about a book today that was a medieval book that was talked about, has been talked about for 500 years.
And no one has any fucking idea.
Nope.
Some of them think they do, but they're all a bunch of professor snotty men who think they figured it out because
basically,
they're mentally professor men. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that's the end of the episode today. Thanks, Pat, for being here with me again to nerd out about some weird historical mysteries.
I love some of the historical mystery episodes are both the fan favorites from what we understand and some of ours as well, because they are just it's like real mystery. It's not like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love talking about anime and video games, but there's something about when it exists in our world and it can't be explained that it's just
adds another layer of enigma, another layer of mystery that we just want to see unwrapped.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say it because I say it every single time aliens are mentioned. If aliens, Indrid Cold, if you're out there watching, come on down. Say hey.
Yeah,
again.
Come chat with me. I'm inviting you to come talk to me.
For fuck's sake, just prove it. I think most humans can handle your existence. There are some that would lose their minds. We can let them go. It's fine. Sorry.
Yeah, just come down.
Thank you so much, Atlas. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Pat, for being here. Thank everyone for listening. That's episode 25 of Lore Lords. We'll be seeing you next time.
Absolutely. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Goodbye.